Ladies and gentlemen, today I want to talk to you about the danger of becoming spellbound by groupthink. And by groupthink, I don't mean only the increasingly Orwellian Big Brother groupthink coming out of the mainstream. No, we're also going to be pointing to or touching on groupthink as it exists in certain subcultures of social media, whether that be New Age groupthink, or feminist groupthink, or white supremacist groupthink. And indeed, we're also going to be raising the possibility of whether groupthink is being fostered in certain Catholic and traditional corners on social media, including YouTube. And we're also going to be talking about something that I'm calling the normalization of the outrageous, where things that were once abnormal become normal, where outrageous things, we get used to them, so they become normal. Now, this is something I began raising in the last episode of this series, episode 30, where I expressed my concern that in certain places on YouTube, there were certain Catholic YouTube stars who, maybe very unwittingly, without wishing to do this, were actually promoting this normalization of the outrageous. And I particularly pointed to one specific episode from Dr. Taylor Marshall. There's no need to go look at the episode to see everything I said there, because I'm going to briefly recap it for you now. Basically, I had seen an episode from Dr. Marshall where he was really suggesting that the Latin Mass communities, such as the Institute of Christ the King, or the Institute of the Bon Pastor, or Good Shepherd, or the Fraternity of St. Peter, had been acting cowardly in the current crisis in the wake of Traditionalist Custodes. And I was shocked by this, because to my mind, what Dr. Marshall was saying there could only undermine these communities at a time of crisis. I was very concerned that even if he didn't mean to, he was actually kicking good men while they were down. And it was a really shocking video for me. And yet I'm more and more aware that what so shocked me on that video is not necessarily shocking to other people. And I think it's not shocking because I fear that what Dr. Marshall is doing there and what other people on YouTube are doing is normalizing things that should be shocking. Now, before we move on, we're not going to say much more about Dr. Marshall in this episode, but before we move on, I just want to say that that episode was a very difficult episode for me to make. I've never made an episode like it before. I'm in no hurry to make it again. At times I'm struggling with whether the tone of what I said was occasionally, at least in a few instances, too harsh to Dr. Marshall, but I stand by the content. I stand by the content of what I said, that these communities which have carried the Latin Mass, have carried beauty, have carried orthodoxy to the far corners of the earth, these communities that we owe so much to, should not be kicked when they're down. So I stand by the content, but I'm evaluating how I present myself, on this channel. Anyway, no need to rehash all of that episode. You can see it here if you want. Alas, it's difficult to edit out things like tone, but the episode still stands and you can see it here if you want to. Anyway, I want to move along from individual personalities like Dr. Marshall. I mean, it may be necessary to come back briefly to him, but really get to the issues here. And the issues, again, are where what was once abnormal becomes normal. Or I'll be suggesting here that there may be traditionalists who are unwittingly making very untraditional things normal. So yeah, the subject here is normalizing the outrageous. And the way in I'd like to come at this now is that after the video I got a comment from a chap, I imagine he's a friendly chap, seems to have engaged with my video, for which I thank him. And he said a couple of things that really struck me. He said something to the effect that he said he was fine with Dr. Marshall's video, and he said maybe the problem was in manner or tone, that Dr. Marshall had an American tone. I understand, because I had actually pointed out to Dr. Marshall being very American. But what I really want to say here is there's no problem, ladies and gentlemen, with an American tone here. All kinds of Americans have a very beautiful tone, a very warm and friendly, relaxed tone, compared to some British people who sometimes tend to be, and I can be this way, a little bit more nervous, a little bit more uptight. Anyway, he said something very telling, I thought. He said something, that I was very proper compared to what he was used to. And I want to emphasize those words, used to. Because what I'm seeing, at least I think I'm seeing, and I've been engaging on social media a lot, very unusual for me, is that people may be evaluating what somebody says on YouTube not according to its merits or lack of merits, but according to what they are used to. So if someone says something that sort of conforms to what they are used to, then all well and good. But if somebody says something that sounds a discordant note from what they are used to, then it becomes potentially suspicious. And I'm noticing this, going to develop it more, but it alerts me to the danger, at least the danger, of groupthink. So again, I'm actually going to be speaking about, not just the Orwellian 1984 massive groupthink fostered by the mainstream media, but all kinds of people these days, good people, who are sensitized to how awful what is coming out of the mainstream media is, are, tuning into their own little subcultures on YouTube, on Facebook, on social media, really as a kind of refuge from the ugliness pouring forth from the mainstream media. That is very, very understandable. And some of these subcultures on social media are no doubt incredibly supporting people. But there is also a danger of an echo chamber, that you end up in a little group on Facebook and you're with a certain crowd of people, and what you're basically hearing all the time is what other people with that kind of view think. And so you get used to hearing what's going on within that subculture, and the danger is that you then evaluate people as to whether or not they conform with what the rest of your subculture on YouTube is saying. So that's what I want to explore here, and I want to explore the possibility of people becoming spellbound by a certain subculture, or by charismatic leaders of a subculture. Now, as it happens, I happen to have a lot of personal experience of being spellbound by a subculture, and I want to use that experience to illustrate what I mean here. So, as those of you who know my books or this channel will know already, many years ago, 40 years ago, I was spellbound by the emergent subculture of the New Age movement. And I lived and breathed in this New Age subculture, so that very strange, very weird ideas actually became normal to me, because I was never listening to anything outside of that New Age culture. As I've said before, I was a very idealistic young man, going right back to when I was 16. When I first got into the New Age, I was very suspicious of the mainstream culture, which looked to me completely materialistic and devoid of any spiritual meaning. And I fell into this New Age subculture, which sort of promised, the glory of a dawning spiritual New Age of Aquarius. We've gone into that in episodes before, most particularly an episode I'd recommend if you're interested with Dr. Joseph Shaw, where I'm saying what happened to me there. But here's a key thing about my experience in the 80s. I ended up going to a New Age community called Findhorn. Not too many Catholics will know about it, although Father Malachi Martin once described it as the Vatican City of the New Age movement because it is enormously influential in the New Age movement. And as I said to Dr. Shaw, it's incredibly hard to describe what Findhorn is. In some ways it might seem like a cult, and it does have aspects that are a bit like a cult, but I wouldn't, a cult, I'm saying, but I wouldn't actually call it a cult. It has aspects that are a bit like a hippie commune. It's now a non-governmental organization, NGO, in the United Nations, and its founders have received high honors from the United Kingdom establishment. But my point here is that back in the 1980s, there was no social media. There was no YouTube. So, what was all around me was the mainstream, the sort of monolithic mainstream. So if I was to get into a situation as a young man where all these, weird New Age ideas were going to become normal for me, what I actually had to do was go and live amongst the people, for whom they were normal. I had to physically get out of the mainstream culture and go relocate myself in the Vatican City of the New Age movement. And there, I could live and breathe, 24/7, all these strange ideas from the New Age. I don't want to go too much into that. You can listen to the episode where I'm talking to Dr. Shaw if you want to get a better picture of that. My point right now is that what was necessary back then, because the mainstream culture was monolithic and all around you, was to be in, pretty much close face-to-face contact with people in order for that subculture to become normal. Alright, I'm going to illustrate with another example of how things were back in the 1980s. Back then, if you were in Britain at least, there was a famous women's camp. Thousands and thousands and thousands, I think it could have been 20, 30,000, I don't know, camped out at a place called Greenham Common. And Greenham Common was where NATO was going to install some cruise missiles. Women formed a women-only protest where they were actually living outside this, American base in Britain. I'm not sure how long, weeks, months at a time. So that would be an example. If you were a feminist in Britain in the 80s, you could go, at least for a short period of time, go and camp out at Greenham Common. And you would just be in face-to-face contact with all your colleagues, protesting cruise missiles and protesting the patriarchy, because you couldn't find that kind of camaraderie or companionship on social media or YouTube. But now everything is changed. I don't look very much at all at, feminist YouTube, but I'm sure it's out there hugely. I'm sure that there are all kinds of young, impressionable women who are surrounded by feminist social media groups, watching feminist YouTube, where there are women telling them, the patriarchy is the problem here, smash the patriarchy, and we'll automatically have a better world, just like, New Agers believed that Aquarius was going to bring a better world. Who are being taught, obviously, that it's just normal and natural to kill your child in the womb. There's a whole thing there, where you no longer have to be in a physical community. Now, I would imagine that if you're a young feminist woman, you can spend all your time, or a lot of your time, just online, having feminist messages reinforced to you again and again and again. And there are other examples of online subcultures. We might talk about, say, a white supremacist subculture that's out there online, where people are just getting surrounded by the same messages again and again and again and again. And superficially, this might seem to be like a universe away from feminism or the New Age. But is it really? Because as ugly as white supremacist, thinking undoubtedly is, as ugly as it is, there are commonalities between all of these things. In all of these things, New Age, feminism, white supremacy, you actually have a group of people in reaction to the mainstream culture who think they have some kind of answer that's going to lead to a better world. And, it's a very simplistic answer. And it's not just a simplistic answer, it's also often an answer that involves scapegoating. So that should be obvious with something like white supremacy, but the New Agers are often scapegoating Christians or scapegoating people of other religions, pretending that, we New Agers are transcending religion and religion is the problem, having no idea how much they're promoting a religion, another topic. But, you see the same thing with at least certain strands, I think, of feminism. They're at least sometimes fostering a scapegoating of men as the problem. At least certain strands are fostering that. And I think one of the problems, with those kinds of strands of feminism, and indeed all kinds of other progressive philosophies in the wake of the, Enlightenment in the 18th century, so-called Enlightenment, is that we've lost track of the idea, ladies and gentlemen, that we are all fallen and broken. So, before the so-called Enlightenment, Christian Europe knew that it was fallen and broken, that human nature was tragic, didn't have these progressive ideas. And if you know that you're fallen and broken, and it's not just men who are fallen, obviously men can be fallen in certain very obvious and violent ways, but it doesn't mean that women aren't fallen in different ways. If you lose track of the idea that humanity is just radically fallen, then it's easy. You start believing that humanity is just this great progressive thing moving onwards and upwards. If you lose track of that, you can start to scapegoat other groups very easily. And then you get this sort of situation where charismatic YouTube stars, and I don't know who they are, but I'm sure there are feminist superstars and white supremacist superstars on YouTube who are at least fostering, implying that kind of scapegoating, and it goes around in echo chambers because the people have charisma. Now, in some cases, they might have more than charisma. In some cases, they might have real erudition or even brilliance of a certain kind. I mean, humanity has been swept away by figures who possessed a certain kind of brilliance. One thinks of, say, Karl Marx, who has swept away millions of human beings. You can certainly say, Karl Marx was a polymath, was a polyglot, read at least numerous European languages, had, an understanding of European history and economics. You can see a certain kind of brilliance there in Karl Marx, and yet you can see something extremely simplistic. So all this, erudite mental energy arguing something like, religion is the opium of the people, the sigh of the oppressed. Religion is reduced to just oppressed peoples in exploited by capitalists who are sighing, and everything is just reduced to a very simplistic and ultimately stupid materialistic theory. But people do indeed get swept away by these things because the people who represent them, can be brilliant in a certain limited way. But anyway, my real point here is to speak about these subcultures. So I don't know a lot about a white supremacist subculture, but I can see how it happens. I can see that, yes, particularly in this kind of increasingly nightmarish, Orwellian Big Brother world that we're in, a Big Brother world that tells you that what we really need to be aiming for is some sort of extremely abstract society where cultural roots have no meaning. I can see how, just like I, as a New Ager, sought refuge from the materialistic mainstream, I can see how white supremacists feel the ugliness of the mainstream, telling them that their cultures, have no value, and all we need to do is create this kind of abstract capitalistic society, what's good for the market, basically. And they're hungering. They're hungering for something with some rootedness, with some depth. And then, yes, maybe there are some charismatic people there. Maybe there are even some quite intelligent people, deconstructing the cultural left in ways that are actually, quite sophisticated. And you get into this white supremacist culture, and maybe you don't even realize it at first, but implicitly, at least if not explicitly, there's a set of messages there that somehow to be white is to be best, and this is the real answer to the problem. And maybe without even knowing it, you're in this echo chamber where everyone is kind of echoing you. You don't need to sort of any longer be part of a physical community like a Ku Klux Klan, because you're able to be in the community online. And people are surrounding you with messages that you get used to, that seem to you more and more normal. And, particularly, if you're young, you could get, just like young women are swept away by feminism, and there are people swept away by Marxism. You could be swept away by this in the hope of a better world, and you could really believe that, maybe you're even religious, and you think that God has somehow, favored white people, in a special way that gives them a license to sort of dominate and exploit, other peoples. Weird, horrible, awful things begin to become natural, normal, not natural. Bit by bit by bit. I mean, at the same time, I want to say, that there is a rebellion here against our Orwellian Big Brother, because Orwellian Big Brother will tell us that, no European achievements are any good. Colonialism was just something absolutely terrible. It gives us a very simplistic black and white picture. Whereas, the truth, as I see it anyway, of something like colonialism is that it was both horrible and it could be wonderful. It brought other people's incredible technology, incredible medicine, including the most holy medicine of all, the sacraments, the holy sacraments. So, if you're part of, the Big Brother kind of politically correct monster, you just want to feed people a simple black and white answer that colonialism was nothing but evil. And this is the problem. People in these subcultures can see these phony, simple black and white answers. And they get suspicious of them. And they see, that European peoples have done certain things in accordance, no doubt, with divine providence, and also things that are terribly, terribly fallen, that have horribly, horribly exploited and ruined other peoples as well. So reality is not as simplistic as our Big Brother would like to tell us. And we are seeing now the emergence of these online reactions where people get into, as far as I can see, an online culture that's, I say culture, it could even be, we're going to come to this, it could even be a little bit like a cult. Okay? You get into this online culture or cult where you are constantly being echoed. You're in something like, a jungle of parrots all saying the same thing. And some of them are saying it with more charisma than others, or even in some cases more brilliance than others. It may be a twisted brilliance, but again, someone like Karl Marx certainly had a brilliance to him. And pretty soon, this online culture or this online cult begins to look normal to you. As I say, I don't know much about this, so I shouldn't speak much about it, but I'm sure it's out there. You can just have these kinds of messages reinforced around the clock. So I'm talking about like feminist groupthink or white supremacist groupthink, or new age groupthink. I'm very, very conscious in all of this that there is a horrendous mainstream groupthink that becomes, more and more Orwellian um, with every passing year. That Orwellian things become, there's a creeping normalization of George Orwell type, 1984. You know, 10 years ago, even 10 years ago, I think even 5 years ago, things like cancel culture were not normal. They were not normal. The kind of world I grew up in, all of this is shocking. It's a creeping kind of thing. I mean, it's a joke to speak about cancel culture because it isn't culture. It's a kind of herd groupthink, herd stampeding, unconscious mass movement. I cannot do it justice now. And again, I probably don't know enough about it. But my point is, I'm just using these as examples of all kinds of group things. Some of them small, some of them big, where somebody thinks they have the answer to change the world, whether it's smashing the patriarchy or, cancelling out all kinds of great historical figures and tearing down their statues, and it all becomes more and more normal in this creeping way. And how much are people really asking, what are the merits here? And how much are they just swept away by whatever subculture they happen to be in, or swept away by the immense power, of organs like the BBC and the mainstream news and all kinds of things like that. All right, I want to talk about the idea of cults and cultic behavior. And what we can't do on a video like this is go into a precise textbook academic definition of what a cult is. I mean, if I were writing an academic paper, I could spend 10 pages on that, or spend 10 minutes on that, and you'd all be asleep, or switch the YouTube video off. I can't always be precise here. I can't always be precise. I mean, similarly, the way I've been speaking about feminism, it would probably have been better to speak about radical feminism, smashing the patriarchy, and so forth. But a point I would make with both of these things is that things bleed through. What do I mean by bleed through or seep through? So in the case of feminism, someone like the American Michael Moore writing best-selling books with titles like Stupid White Men is probably not a radical feminist, but ideas from radical feminism would seem to me to have seeped into his consciousness. And, things that are not proper cults can nonetheless be cult-like. So, I was at Findhorn, as I said earlier. I don't think that Findhorn was a cult in the proper textbook, version of the word, but it would have encouraged, in certain ways, cult-like thinking in me. And there's so many things. This is so sprawling as to what could come into this. For example, I'm aware that I have not even spoken about our universities. I think particularly our universities in the Anglosphere, where all kinds of politically correct leftish ideas and ideologies are just now enculturated in young people again. All right, this fostering of scapegoating, stupid white men or dead white males for all the ills of civilization is something that appears to me to be being fostered. In the Anglosphere, I have to say, particularly in the American universities, I think, although it's certainly coming over to England and Ireland as well. And I'm going to make a little digression here, because it's hard for me, in a way. I don't really want to get American backs up when I say these things. Americans have to be congratulated for the fact that there is a real pushback in America against these things. There's not so much anywhere near like that pushback in Britain or Ireland. But my little digression is to do with France, where there's also a pushback, unlike Ireland or England, on a completely different scale to it anyway. And my digression is this. I've been speaking on this channel about how different French traditionalism can be from American traditionalism. As I go into French traditionalist literature or YouTube channels or whatever, I often come across this idea, rightly or wrongly, won't make any claims for truth for it yet, that political correctness is something that comes out of liberal American university culture. It's very much seen by American traditionalists, by French traditionalists. But you know what? It's not just French traditionalists who are saying this in France. It's all kinds of people who are saying this in France. Just like French traditionalism can be very different from American traditionalism, the French left can be very different from the American left. So I'll give you an example of what I mean. I spent some time. I had the great privilege of returning to France for a few months a couple of years ago. I did an episode on this channel about it, episode 22. But while I was in France, I couldn't resist picking up this left-wing magazine. This magazine, a famous French weekly called Marianne. You'll see in the corner a picture of the bare-breasted Marianne, the personification of the French Revolution. Make no mistake, friends, in what I'm about to say. This is an icon of the French left. It's completely, thoroughly left-wing, journal in France. Marianne. Why did I want this? Well, I'm going to translate for you the cover, or at least some of it. So this cover says, "The assault of those obsessed with race, with sex, with gender, and with identity." The French left is concerned about people becoming obsessed about these things. And then if you go down to the sort of small print, it says they import American political correctness. They infiltrate universities, associations, and unions. They forbid works of art. And here's another French magazine devoted to political correctness. Admittedly, this one's from the French right rather than the French left, but the title at the bottom is significant. It reads, "When American Excesses Menace France." This is an idea that you get a lot in French culture, and I'm going to name it, both on the French right and also on the French left, that there's something rather puritanical in Anglo-American culture. Many people on the French right would say that it comes out of, Protestantism, that there's something about Catholicism that just naturally embraces what is earthy and organic and is not, so puritanical. It's a whole thread in French culture that, the American left, Anglo-American left, is sort of puritanical based on its Protestant culture. Controversial ideas maybe, but I'm just going to name them. In fact, I'm going to bring up an article here that appeared in the British paper, The Observer, and that's the Sunday edition of The Guardian. And it's also speaking to this idea. Even many people in France find the American left rather puritanical. So it's speaking, we have an article after the Me Too backlash, an insider's guide to French feminism, where certain, 100 French prominent women, including the actress Catherine Deneuve, signed a letter. I'm going to just read a little bit of it. French women made headlines all over the world last week. Skipping it down, because 100 of them signed an open letter published in Le Monde, offering an alternative view of the Me Too campaign and drawing attention to what they regard as rampant censorship in feminist ranks. In short, they think the campaign by the Me Too movement to tackle sexual harassment represents a puritanical wave of purification, that rape is a crime, but trying to seduce someone, even persistently or cack-handedly, is not. It's not a crime. Nor is being gentlemanly a macho attack. So that's just an example, one example of many I could give of how many French people on both the French left and the French right see the Protestant Anglosphere as having something of a hysterical, puritanical quality. It's not to say they're right, it's just to bring other perspectives into this channel here that I'd like to elaborate at some point. What am I getting at here? So many things kind of blend and bleed together into one. There is there certainly seems to be, like proper cults. Like, say, a classic example would be the Moonies, the Unification Church, where if you went and joined that, you might easily become brainwashed. But what about other things that are not properly a cult, like Greenham Common Women's Camp, or Findhorn, or maybe some of the humanities departments in American universities, where there is a lot of face-to-face reinforcement going on. The memory's coming back here. I mentioned it in episode 17 of an American girlfriend I once had, who's passed away now, God rest her soul, but she was an ardent feminist, and had come out of a sort of small upstate in New York, I think, liberal college, and I had a direct experience, this was back in the 80s, in Britain, of hearing all of these, for me, very striking leftish feminist things that I'd never heard before. Anyway, so I'm shaped by that. I'm shaped by having this American girlfriend who introduced me to these strange, or at least strange to me, bizarre, feminist ideas that she had, seems to me now, uncritically absorbed in her New York college. I go into that for anyone who's interested in episode 17 on this channel. So, when the French sort of see these things, talk about, dead white males or stupid white men coming out of America, it does seem to me, from having lived in, France and Spain and other cultures, that, the Anglosphere is so often on the cutting edge of progressive thinking, so-called progressive thinking. Now, in America, unlike England, you have also a massive pushback against that. And Americans have to be incredibly congratulated for that kind of pushback. I don't think you have that kind of pushback in England or Ireland. So, wow, just huge topics here. I may be editing some out, or I may not, but what I really want to get at is cult-like behavior It clearly happens in physical locations like university campuses or Greenham Common, women's camp or New Age communities. But I'm concerned that that was a phenomenon that was still in the past relatively isolated. Now, any young person can get online and really be surrounded by a virtual presence, a non-physical presence of colleagues and comrades and friends and people that are all saying the same thing to them. And so, what was once, a more isolated, phenomenon like, my American girlfriend in this upstate New York college, or Greenham Common Women's Camp, becomes something that is far more generalized now. That we had this monolithic mainstream that was extremely materialistic, and now everything is breaking up into all these small communities online that, you couldn't call them exactly cults, but quite possibly they do exhibit some cult-like phenomena. And maybe in a sort of more general and casual term way, not a sort of academic way, I could sort of sloppily refer some of these online cultures to being cults or like cults. But leaving that aside, this is my concern here. And I'm concerned particularly for the young. Because, when you're younger, you are more impressionable. Hopefully, as you get older and you meet more people and hopefully you read a bit and you encounter different perspectives, you broaden yourself. But when I look at my youth, really thinking that an age of Aquarius was right round the corner, I mean, all kinds of New Age thinking has become mainstream now. So, although we're not living in some glorious age of Aquarius, this kind of cultic thinking very much goes into the mainstream. That's another whole topic. But yes, I'm concerned about young people being in echo chambers online, where it might almost be like they are in a cult, a feminist cult or whatever. But of course, the question we're looking at here today, or one of the questions is could something like this be happening within Catholic tradition, within Traditionalist Catholicism online? And I want to raise that as a question. I'm not going to hammer home an answer today because I've probably done a little bit too much hammering home lately. I want to raise it as a question, though. I mean, if you ask me, I will say to you in a quiet way that I do fear that there is a groupthink happening in Traditionalist Catholicism, and I'm going to come to that, but quietly, not hammering. But really, I want to more raise the question than anything. But, I would point out some things before. Catholic tradition has some very important differences from, obviously incredibly important differences from these other ideologies that we're speaking of. I mean, I'm aware that a cynic, a materialist, would say to me, well, Catholicism is just another ideology, it's just another way of thinking and it's aligned to a group. And a cynic like that obviously would miss all kinds of very important things. He would miss the fact that a supernatural mystery of the highest order is working through the Eucharist and through the other sacraments. It's also working through rosary prayers. Even if you have, holy water in your home, supernatural power is streaming through the Catholic Church and is streaming through Catholic tradition. And that's the most key difference of all. There's all kinds of materialists who will tell me, well, Roger, when you were young, you were into this weird New Age thinking, and now you're into this weird Catholic thinking. It's just, what psychoanalysts call enantiodromia, where you just swing from one opposite to the other. And of course, they have no idea, as I've tried to say on this channel elsewhere, about the supernatural power of the sacraments changing me day in, day out. That's a theme on this channel that I really want to bring out more. I might recommend actually episode 21 on this channel. It's maybe my favorite episode on this channel, and it's also fairly short, 20 minutes. How Catholicism made me human. The Catholic mystery has given me something that kind of Fintor New Age type cultic, ideology deriving from Blavatsky ultimately, could never give me. But there are other ways that Catholic tradition, beyond the unspeakable power of the Eucharist, to protect us, to render us ever more wholesome, to render us ever more sane, beyond that power, could be said to protect against groupthink. Because as Catholics, the ideal, anyway, is that we are assenting to things consciously. Okay? To assent to the dogmas of the faith, is ideally a conscious act. What is going on in so much groupthink is that the person doesn't know what they're assenting to. This is one of the things I'm saying about the New Age after all my experience of it. The New Agers say, religion, that's a belief system. Religion, that's full of dogmas. And they have absolutely no idea, most of them, that they are assenting to dogmas. As the great G.K. Chesterton once said, there are only two kinds of people: those who accept dogmas and know it, and those who accept dogmas and don't know it. And that's my experience of the New Age scene. They accept all kinds of dogmas, have very serious beliefs about the nature of reality, but those beliefs aren't clearly spelled out. If you spell the dogmas out clearly, and you assent to them consciously, that's not groupthink. Groupthink is a kind of unconscious going along with the herd. Another important point I think that I would throw in is that Catholics have, especially traditional Catholics, one of the key features here that they exhibit is, a deep interest and indeed a reverential interest for history. I can't speak much about the people into cancel culture, but the impression that I get is that they have no interest in history. They probably hardly know what was happening 5 or 10 years ago, let alone 100 years ago or 500 years ago or 2,000 years ago. Obviously, it's very, very different with Catholicism. So if anyone tries to say to me that Catholicism is, just another ideology and of course just as prone to groupthink as anything else, I will say to them, they have no idea of the supernatural mystery that is forming every sincere Catholic going to Mass, receiving the sacraments. And yes, the sacramentals, the rosary, holy water, they have no idea of the supernatural mystery, the Catholic mystery. So, I reject with indignation the idea that you can reduce the Catholic mystery to groupthink or to just another ideology like Marxism or feminism or New Ageism. which goes back to the ideology of Blavatsky. But at the same time, although we are speaking about an unutterable supernatural mystery here, we shouldn't get too cocky or arrogant. Catholics are foolish, broken, stupid, fallen, just like all the rest of us. And despite the incredible supernatural graces here, there's plenty of capacity to fall into mindless, unconscious, knee-jerk activity, particularly in the 21st century internet, I would say, which is reducing a lot of us, I think, to less and less conscious forms of behavior. But my purpose here is, as I say, I don't want to hammer this home. I do want to raise the question of whether there is a traditionalist Catholic groupthink going on. Personally, I think there is. I am, as I've been saying on this video and the last, I'm spending a lot more time than usual looking at social media, looking at YouTube, looking at Facebook, and I see in these really horrendous times for Catholics in the wake of the awful things happening in the Vatican, that there's a lot of pain, a lot of anger, and yes, I'm seeing a lot of knee-jerk kind of things, or things that appear to me knee-jerk. But my purpose here is not to tear down fellow Catholics. That episode that I did on Taylor Marshall, or rather a very particular episode of Taylor Marshall, is not something, I hope to repeat. I'm going to repeat, I would never have done that episode on that specific episode of Dr. Marshall's if I hadn't watched him with shock tearing down traditionalist priests and calling them in effect cowards. I would never have made an episode like that. I don't intend to make other episodes like that tearing down Catholics. I really want to focus on the whole matter of, can we get into a kind of normalized behavior where we're doing things that Catholics never ever did before, where traditional Catholics are doing things that are very untraditional. And I'm seeing a lot of evidence of that online, but I'm not going to, and other people are telling me things about this happening. I'm not going to do a whole expose of that. I'd like to just suggest to you, ladies and gentlemen, that you watch out for it. You watch out and ask yourself, are some of the representatives of Traditionalist Catholicism, actually doing very untraditional things? Because I don't want to go into start naming other people and things like that. I hope it might be permissible for me to just reference, quietly something that I said last time. I picked out the example before of Dr. Marshall running an opinion poll as to whether traditionalist priests, the superiors of institutes like the Good Shepherd and Christ the King and the Fraternity of St. Peter, were acting cowardly. And I said that never in the history of the Catholic Church, would you have Catholics, especially Catholics who consider themselves traditionalists, running opinion polls to determine things like this. This is extraordinary 21st century behavior, ladies and gentlemen. And, a point I didn't make on that video, the priest is an alter Christus. The priest has had the sacrament of ordination. The priest is transformed in his soul, and it's part of tradition to recognize the supernatural power of ordination. It doesn't mean, of course, that priests are perfect, but, I am concerned, and I'm not going to name all kinds of names, that there are all kinds of lay people on YouTube, who are not transformed in their souls this way. Taylor Marshall is not an alter Christus. I'm not going to name other names, but it's something to think about. Never have traditional Catholics torn down their priests like this. That is why I was, so shocked, and that is why I decided to do the episode I did. Now, I'm seeing other instances of things that also trouble me. They really trouble me. I'm, again, concerned about the issue of young people being formed by this kind of very 21st century YouTube Catholicism. And young people being told this is traditional Catholicism, when in fact, at least in certain respects, it appears really quite untraditional to me. So yes, I'm troubled by this situation. But ladies and gentlemen, please don't think that I don't realize that there is a far more troubling situation, which is the fact that all of this kind of YouTube catechesis, formation of the Catholic conscience that I've been pointing to in the last couple of episodes, exists in large measure because of the catastrophe in the Catholic Church in the wake of Vatican II, and that people have been betrayed by their bishops. Catechesis is not at all what it needs to be. Catechesis, these days might well resemble things more from my New Age youth, or things, like the World Economic Forum. No one should be under any illusions that I don't see that, although, certain things I think I'm occasionally hearing in this strange activity on social media that I'm undertaking, is that people might think that. They might think that I don't see this. Someone said to me something like, "Don't shoot the messenger," meaning Taylor Marshall. Again, I wouldn't have done anything like this if Taylor Marshall did not look to me like he was shooting down good traditionalist priests. But the person obviously has a point, that there are far, far graver troubles going on in the Catholic Church than simply this 21st century YouTube Catholic catechesis that I'm identifying. What can I say? If people, don't see me producing, a whole slew of, angry anti-Pope Francis videos, or anti-Vatican videos, angry, there are reasons for that. Where is the best place to put our anger about these things? I see people, it's very understandable, venting their anger on social media, Catholic Facebook, things like that. I want to suggest that maybe the best place to take your anger about what's going on in the church is to your confessor. That's certainly, I share the same anger as all kinds of you do. But, for me, I want to take it to my confessor, not sort of vent it on social media, because then, it again creates this kind of normalization of Catholics attacking the hierarchy. Again, it's all very deeply understandable. The situation is so tragic and heartrending here. But we need to think about what's really wise and prudent here, rather than erecting on social media, erecting on YouTube, this kind of venting of rage, in many cases, about what's happening in the church. Let us take it to our confessors. Oh, so many dilemmas here, ladies and gentlemen. Um, I do think there's a serious problem here, but what to do? I don't want to keep hammering this home. I certainly don't want to do, as I said earlier, make some kind of expose of what's going on YouTube or social media, tearing down other good Catholics, partly because I'm not qualified to do that. I really don't know enough what's going on. I don't watch YouTube very much, apart from some French YouTube, as I said. But I find myself in the position that it feels necessary to make some kind of statement, to raise these issues, maybe raise them as questions, because I suspect that some of the viewers I have know far more about this than I do, and maybe you'd like to leave a comment if you know more than I do. So really, I'm just going to raise questions now. Maybe close by raising some questions. So what do you think? Do you think that there's any danger here of a new kind of Catholic culture on 21st YouTube that is very much fostering a kind of unconscious groupthink, or even could be in danger of becoming a little bit cult like? You know, what with various charismatic YouTube stars? I think I should also say, you know, it's not just a matter of charismatic YouTube stars. There may well be people out there on YouTube that are actually brilliant. You know, I've been invoking, you know, people that do have a certain brilliance, like Karl Marx, you know, or really Blavatsky at the fount of, you know, the New Age ideology had a certain brilliance. You can think of it as a Luciferic brilliance if you want, you know, rather than a godly brilliance. But there are people with brilliant minds who dazzle people. They sweep them away. Um, Brilliant does not necessarily mean being wise or prudent or human. In fact, I can think of someone on YouTube. I'm not going to name the person. I don't know this person well. He's not a traditional Catholic, but I know a lot of traditional Catholics watch him, who strikes me as brilliant indeed. You know, I feel like I could learn a lot from his mind. But is the person I'm thinking about, does not always strike me as prudent or wise. That's another whole topic, but you know, the question I'm with is, are people being carried away, either by charisma or indeed genuine brilliance? But brilliance, again, it may dazzle, but it's not necessarily wise. Then there's the question I raised of people getting used to things. You know, I don't know if the chap who left me that comment will ever see this video. He might think I'm making too much of his words used to, and perhaps I am, but incidentally, this wasn't just about this chap. It was about, again, some of these social media interactions that I've had, where it seemed to me, rightly or wrongly, that I might be saying something novel or different or new, and the person sort of had to, it's just an impression, rightly or wrongly, scratch their head, and rather than maybe think about what I was actually saying, I had the impression, rightly or wrongly, that they might be scratching their head and thinking, well, what is this? You know, does it fit with my group? Or unconsciously, they might be thinking things, because we all have unconscious thought processes. So people might be judging things in accordance to what they're used to on social media. And there's a danger there, because if we're all just unconsciously judging things according to what we're used to, then unthinkable things, even outrageous things, we can get used to them. And that's what I mean by the danger of the normalization of the outrageous. So yeah, I think, for example, I keep going on about it, what I said about opinion polls has some kind of merit to it, but maybe other people on YouTube aren't raising that as a question. If I'm right that something like that is happening, it's another indication of some kind of groupthink coming into Catholic tradition on social media. So, yes, ladies and gentlemen, I raise these as questions to you. Do you think I'm onto something? Maybe leave me a comment if you do. I don't, I'm trying to answer most comments at the moment. I can't guarantee forever. I often take longer with them than many people do. I'm sort of wary of this kind of manic social media century where everyone feels pressured to get back to everyone instantly. So I might take some time, but I suspect that many of my viewers know a lot more about this than I do. So, what do you think? What do you think about this? Alright, nearly done. Just two last items, I think. Item number one is, if you've been watching this video, you will have seen my 3 books on the bookshelf behind me. But really, the best place to check those out, if you'd like to do that, is my Amazon author page, and there's a link down below for that. Item number 2 is that I just want to point out that this channel also has videos where I read from my books. There's episode 11, which is a very short, I think 5-minute video called One of Us. And I'm basically reading a passage from my big book called JESU, SACRATISSIMUM, that I'm very happy with. And then I actually also have on episode 25, I read the first chapter of my first Gentle Traditionalist book. It feels a little bit odd, all this self-promotion I'm doing here, but I do put a lot of work into these episodes. A lot of prayer, a lot of thinking. They may be technically crude, but they take days and days and days to make, most of them. So I do want them to be seen. And on that note, I will just say, please, if you liked the episode, hit the like button or subscribe. If you like what I'm doing and you're not a subscriber already, maybe make a comment. Among other things, this will tell these soulless Google supercomputers that people care about these videos, and the soulless supercomputers will actually work to make this channel more visible to people. And I would appreciate it if the channel were made more visible to people. So thank you for that if you can do that. And I think that's all I'm going to say for now, friends, except take care in these dark and troubled times, both for the world and for the Catholic Church. And thank you for watching, and God bless you.